On a serene mountain, an elderly master was teaching his students the importance of humility. One day, a new student arrived, full of pride in his knowledge and abilities. He believed he already had all the answers. The master quietly observed him and said, "Without humility, knowledge remains incomplete." The master said to the student, "Let's do a simple exercise." He took an empty bowl and began pouring water into it. When the bowl was full, the master continued to pour, and the water overflowed. The student, surprised, said, "The bowl is already full, it can't hold any more." The master smiled and replied, "Like this bowl, you are full of pride and knowledge. Until you empty yourself, you cannot learn anything new." The student stood quietly, trying to understand the master's words. The student realized his mistake. He understood that his pride was hindering his progress. He asked the master, "What must I do to let go of my ego?" The master replied, "First, learn to accept yourself, and then move towards humility." In the following days, the student began to meditate and reflect on himself. He saw how much pride and ego had built up within him. Slowly, he worked on changing himself and carefully listened to the master's teachings each day. The master said, "True wisdom comes only to those who make space for humility within." One day, the student said to the master, "I am practicing humility, but I still feel incomplete." The master smiled and replied, "The journey of humility is an endless one. To believe it is complete is not true humility." The student asked the master, "Will there ever be a time when I am fully humble?" The master responded, "Humility is not a destination, it is a process. It is the result of constant practice. When you think you have become humble, that is when you are still learning." The student took the master's words to heart and began applying humility in his life. Every time he felt pride, he would gently release it. The master was pleased with his progress but reminded him, "Remember, humility does not mean weakness." One day, the student saw another struggling. He went over to help and listened to the person's troubles. The master noticed this and said, "Humility is when you forget your ego to help others. A truly humble person serves others without thinking of himself." The student now understood that humility wasn't just thinking less of himself but thinking more of others. He felt a shift in his behavior and thinking. The master said, "The power of humility is recognized by those who can see beyond themselves." One day, the master gathered all his students and said, "Humility is the lamp that can dispel the darkness of ignorance. True knowledge cannot be attained with pride and ego. The more you know, the more humble you must become." The student realized that the more he learned, the less he felt about himself. He knew that humility was shaping him into a better person. He said to the master, "Now I know that humility is my greatest strength." The master nodded and said, "Indeed, it is true strength." Time passed, and the student's ego slowly dissolved. He was now more peaceful and balanced. He had embraced humility in his life, and it showed in his every action. The master, seeing this, said, "Now you are on the path to true wisdom." The master finally said, "Humility does not mean you are weak. It means you know your limitations and do not boast about them. Only those who are true students can become true teachers." The student bowed his head and accepted this truth. The student now saw life through a new lens. Humility had transformed him, and he became more compassionate toward others. The master smiled and said, "Humility is the strength that sets you truly free."